Special Agent United States. Spy allegations are being levied against 3 people connected to President Trump. Get this.
And I also have a message tonight for the incredible people of Greenland. We strongly support your right to determine your own future, and if you choose, we welcome you into the United States of America.
The President of the United States caught running secret espionage missions against one of our closest NATO allies. Sounds unbelievable, right? Yet that's exactly the chaos that erupted early one Wednesday morning, when reports surfaced that Donald Trump had allegedly greenlit a covert operation in Greenland. Yes, Greenland. Now, most of us think of Greenland as a frozen, faraway land of glaciers, icebergs, and tiny villages scattered across endless snow. But beneath that icy exterior lies something Trump saw as a golden prize: strategic military value, natural resources, and the possibility of expanding America's footprint in the Arctic. What makes this explosive is that Greenland isn't some no-man's land, it's part of the Kingdom of Denmark, a loyal NATO partner. And here's the kicker: Denmark caught wind of the alleged espionage. They didn't just whisper about it behind closed doors. They called out Washington directly, demanding answers from the highest U.S. envoy. That's not just a diplomatic slap on the wrist, that's a full-on alarm bell ringing inside NATO headquarters. If proven true, Trump wasn't just poking Denmark. He was playing chicken with NATO's Article 5, the very clause that binds allies together for collective defense. Think about that for a moment. The alliance America helped build after World War II could have been forced into the unthinkable, considering whether they needed to treat the U.S. itself as the threat. But while this storm was brewing overseas, Trump's attention seemed elsewhere. Instead of addressing the crisis, the former president jumped on social media to rage about, wait for it, late-night comedian Seth Meyers. Yes, in the middle of espionage, accusations, and international outrage, Trump's biggest concern was that NBC had allegedly extended Meyers' contract. He called him talentless, insecure, and basically irrelevant. Imagine the leader of the free world facing one of the most embarrassing international scandals of his career, and he's ranting about late-night TV. The contrast was jarring. On one hand, Denmark's government was furious. NATO allies were rattled, and America's reputation was at risk. On the other hand, Trump was busy throwing digital tomatoes at a comedian. For millions of Americans watching the news unfold, it was humiliating, almost surreal, and it didn't stop there. Trump fired off another post targeting Karl Rove, a longtime Republican strategist. Why? Because Rove had been asked about the GOP's success and, in Trump's eyes, failed to give him proper credit. Again, global crisis brewing. Yet Trump was laser-focused on who did or didn't say his name on cable TV. Meanwhile, cracks in his political armor were widening. In Iowa's Senate district, a district that Trump had won by double digits in 2020, Democrats flipped the seat blue. That wasn't just a fluke. It was part of a bigger pattern. Democrats were outperforming expectations by double digits across the board, while Trump's approval numbers plummeted. The economy wasn't helping his case either. Inflation was climbing, layoffs were hitting record highs, and millions of Americans were falling behind on student loans, crushing their credit. Economists were warning that unemployment could spike to nearly 5% by the end of the year. Wall Street Journal editorials even suggested Trump was angling to seize control of the Federal Reserve for his own political gain. If true, that move could turn America into another case study in how strongman leaders wreck economists, Turkey or Zimbabwe. But let's not lose sight of the central scandal here: the alleged spy games in Greenland. Denmark's foreign minister tried to keep a diplomatic tone, saying they welcomed honest criticism but were offended by Washington's approach. A Danish member of parliament, though, dropped all pretenses. His blunt message to Trump was simple: Greenland has been part of Denmark for 800 years. It's not for sale. So, Mr. Trump, back off. And yet, while that drama was unfolding, tragedy struck at home. News broke of a mass shooting at Annunciation Church in Minneapolis, where children were gunned down during morning prayer. 20 lives shattered. 2 young children killed in a place where they should have been safest, kneeling in prayer on the first week of school. The mayor's voice cracked as he spoke about the unbearable grief of families whose kids would never come home. It was another grim reminder of the violence plaguing America, even as its leaders seemed distracted by power plays and personal feuds. But Trump's administration wasn't just facing backlash over Greenland or domestic violence. They were also pushing controversial new plans closer to home. Transportation officials announced they were taking back Union Station in Washington, D.C., framing it as a crackdown on crime and homelessness. But critics saw it as more political theater. And then came another eyebrow-raising move. The Energy Secretary floated the idea that wind farms could be a national security threat, claiming they might somehow enable drone swarms against the US for Trump, who notoriously hated wind turbines. This was the perfect excuse to slam renewable energy, even if it meant stalling America's clean energy future. So picture the scene. America facing economic turbulence, allies furious over espionage, tragic violence at home, and Trump's inner circle pushing bizarre policies about windmills and train stations. Yet, through it all, Trump seemed most energized by social media spats with comedians and party insiders. This wasn't just politics as usual. It felt like watching a circus where the ringmaster had lost control, juggling scandals, crises, and insults all at once. And the audience, the American people, were left wondering, how much longer could this chaotic act go on before it all came crashing down? Greenland espionage scandal shook NATO. The ripple effects at home were just as destabilizing. Let's start with the economy. By early 2025, the numbers were impossible to ignore. Over 806,000 layoffs had already been announced in just the first few months of the year. That's not a typo. Nearly 1 million people losing their jobs. And those who still had jobs weren't safe either. Nearly half of all credit applications were denied, making it harder for families to buy cars, pay medical bills, or even rent apartments. For homeowners, refinancing was practically impossible, with rejection rates at their highest level in 12 years. And then came the student loan crisis. 6 million Americans, 6 million, were officially past due or in default. That meant their credit scores were tanking, their financial futures were collapsing, and the dream of owning a home or starting a business was slipping further out of reach. If you were one of those 6 million, you weren't just drowning into two, were stuck in a financial quicksand with no escape. Now imagine trying to live through all of that while watching your president devote more energy to late-night Twitter battles than to fixing the problem. Every time Americans turned on the TV, they didn't hear solutions. They heard about Trump's latest feud with Seth Meyers or Karl Rove. And when solutions did come, they often sounded like bizarre experiments. Take the Federal Reserve. Normally, it's independent, kept free from political meddling to protect America's financial system. But Trump, he wanted to bend it to his will. He fired members who disagreed with him and made moves to control monetary policy directly. Economists warned this could lead to disaster. When strongmen in other countries took control of their central banks, inflation skyrocketed. Think of Turkey, where bread prices doubled overnight. Or Zimbabwe, where cash became so worthless that people carried stacks of bills just to buy groceries. Critics warned, if Trump got his way, the same nightmare could happen here. But while financial experts were panicking, international leaders were furious. Denmark, once a reliable ally, felt betrayed. Their foreign minister tried diplomacy, but their parliament didn't mince words. They reminded Trump loudly and publicly that Greenland wasn't for sale, wasn't up for negotiation, and definitely wasn't open to backroom espionage deals. NATO officials quietly worried. If America was willing to spy on its own allies, what did that mean for the future of the alliance itself? And yet, Trump's response wasn't to reassure allies or calm markets. Instead, his administration doubled down on culture wars and political theater. First, there was the Union Station spectacle. Officials bragged they would reclaim the iconic Washington, D.C. landmark, portraying it as a battleground against crime and homelessness. The move played well in sound bites, but did little to address the deeper crises facing the country. It was politics by optics. Fix the backdrop, not the problem. Then came the windmill war. Trump's energy secretary claimed that wind farms near highways or railroads could somehow endanger national security, warning that they might be exploited in drone swarm attacks. To many, it sounded absurd, almost like a plot from a low-budget action movie. The Pentagon had already reviewed such claims and found negligible risks. But for Trump, who had long despised wind turbines, this was a perfect excuse to stall clean energy projects and keep America hooked on fossil fuels. The irony was hard to miss. At a time when Europe was racing ahead with renewable energy, America risked being left behind again because of political grudges. Meanwhile, tragedy kept unfolding across the homeland. The mass shooting in Minneapolis wasn't just another headline, it was a national heartbreak. 20 victims, including children, gunned down while praying at church. Parents screamed outside, police scrambled, and the community was shattered. But in the days after, the political leadership offered little beyond thoughts, prayers, and distractions. For many Americans, it felt like their leaders weren't even living in the same reality. And that's really the heart of the story. The scandals, the distractions, the bizarre policy moves, they all painted a picture of a government spiraling out of touch with its people. Denmark and NATO worried about spies. Economists warned of inflation. Families mourned lost children. And yet, Trump's fiercest battles seemed to be with comedians, talk show hosts, and party insiders who didn't flatter him enough. For ordinary Americans, it was humiliating, not just because of the scandals themselves, because of how small and petty their leader looked against the backdrop of global crises. When the country needed statesmanship, it got social media tirades. When allies needed reassurance, they got insults. When families needed protection, they got empty promises. And that left one burning question hanging in the air. How much more could America take? How many more scandals? How many more crises? How many more distractions before the system itself broke under the weight? As Denmark's parliament said it plainly, Greenland was not for sale. But maybe, just maybe, the bigger story wasn't about icebergs or spies at all. Maybe the real story was about a president who, even in the middle of chaos, seemed more interested in fighting ghosts on social media than in leading a nation on the brink. Because in the end, Greenland didn't fall. NATO didn't collapse. But trust in leadership, in institutions, in America's role in the world was left fractured. And rebuilding that trust might take far longer than one election cycle.